Hey folks, I'm Sir Vainglory and welcome to my 20th Anatomy of a Battle video for Steel Division Normandy 44. Again we have a 1v1 ranked battle, this time between the 3rd Armoured Division and the 352nd Infanterie. Sorry for the delay for those of you that may have been waiting intently for my next video. Hopefully I've got a good battle to make up for that wait. So having suffered some bad losses recently, I went into this battle determined to avoid making the sort of mistakes I'd become prone to. Particularly, I wanted to avoid losing high value units like tanks and anti-tank guns by having them isolated and outnumbered. On this map I'd normally do something like rush a large infantry force into the town to get control of the centre of the map, then battle through the town until I got to positions to dominate the open ground beyond. This time I decided I was going to virtually ignore the town to start with, and I was also not going to risk having a relatively weak force trying to take ground and run into a strong defending force. So my plan was to build up a force of a few tanks on the left and punch through the left flank, then swing around to hit any artillery units that might be behind the town and cut off the reinforcement route. Once that was done, I'd attack the town and take control of it with my infantry. I started with 3 fairly similar combat groups. I had a force consisting of a recon section and a machine gun jeep, an armoured rifle squad and an M5A1 light tank on both the left and right flanks, and a recon section in a jeep, an armoured rifle squad and an M8 Scott support tank in the centre. So as I said, the strategy was to avoid having small forces run into much stronger opposition. I therefore had my units hold position on the outskirts of the town covering the main road. I sent my M8 Scott in with this group in hope that it might be able to lob some HE fire at any soft targets that might use the main road, and if it was spotted, to hopefully give my opponent the impression that the tank was supporting a stronger force than it actually had there. On the right I didn't rush forward. I knew the Germans would probably take the buildings and wooded areas on that flank, so I had my units keep to cover while my recce moved up to get eyes on the Germans. Over on the left, my units again moved up slowly, reached their holding positions, and I moved the recce section to take to the tree line to make sure the flank was clear, and I made sure to keep my vehicles away from the forest by the town and wait for reinforcements. Over on the right I sent an M3 to take position behind the orchard where it would have vision on the open ground, but it was spotted and attacked by a Panzer 35R up by the buildings. And then over on the left I decided it was safe to reposition my units to within machine gun range of the forest and to send my recce section a bit further forward. I was bringing in a second M5A1 to bolster this flank with an M21 mortar carrier following up. Back in the right I'd been moving my troops cautiously forward and they encountered infantry, grenadiers I think, in the woods. The M5A1 also spotted the Panzer 35 that had killed my M3. The 2 light tanks traded a few rounds and the M5A1 survived a couple of hits before it forced the Panzer to fall back. My recce section on the left was spotted moving across open ground by a Fusilier squad, and the Fusiliers are equipped with an MG34 that gave them the range to kill my recon. But overall, from the position of the front line marker, I reckoned it would be safe to move my infantry up to the forest to the left of town. There might be more Fusiliers in there as the recon squads don't influence the front line marker, but my M3 would be covered by the machine guns and the tanks and the jeep as it moved up. Back on the right, the infantry was engaged in a firefight, and I didn't want to risk moving the M5A1 into line of sight of any anti-tank units, so I moved the jeep hoping it would help to suppress the infantry. But that turned out to be a bad move. On the left, my M3 had reached the forest and unloaded the rifle squad, but a Panzer 35R appeared and fired on the half-track. So I sent the 2 M5A1s to engage the German tank. The M5s got line of sight on the Panzer and began firing, but I'd forgotten about the Fusilier squad that was in the trees there, and it managed to kill off one of my M5s, although the Panzer 35 was immobilised. So I pulled the remaining M5 back to safety as an Osttroppen squad was spotted approaching it. I moved the machine gun jeep over to support the M5 as the infantry approached, but the jeep was fired on by an MG42 in the church tower in the town. My M21 was in hand now, so I called in mortar fire on the Fusilier's position while I tried to get the jeep to cover, but the jeep was eventually routed by the MG fire, and then it was destroyed. So not the best start. Not keeping very good control of my forces there. Back on the right, I'd brought up another armoured rifle squad to support that flank, where the M5A1 was now under artillery fire. Again, I hoped that the machine gun fire from the M3 would be able to suppress the German infantry, but it wasn't having much effect. The light tank was finally suppressed and forced to fall back by the German artillery. For the moment it was firing on a Fusilier squad in the building. But it was sent into retreat, and as it retreated it moved to the edge of the orchard, where it was engaged by the Panzer 35. So it was hit repeatedly by the Panzer and continued to fall back. So my right flank clearly needed help, so I brought in a P-38 to attack the Panzer. But the tank didn't just survive, it also wasn't suppressed. And it went on to kill my M3 half-track and then target the infantry in the trees. On the left I'd repositioned my M5 to resume firing on the immobilised Panzer, and an MG42 appeared in the tree line to the left behind the town and fired on my rifle squad, so I pulled it back into cover deeper in the trees, and also moved my M21 mortar carrier into a better position to provide support. The M5 was finally able to kill off the Panzer, which had had its tracks broken earlier.
Nice shooting, Gunner.
Back on the right, I'd now lost one of the rifle squads, and the German infantry began advancing on the other, which was pinned. But the M5A1 had recovered morale and was returning to the fight. Unfortunately, the Panzerjäger 35 killed it. And then as the German infantry advanced, it was able to force my rifle squad to surrender, or what's left of the rifle squad.
We give up. Give up.
Over on the left, Junkers 87 came in towards my group of vehicles, and fortunately it targeted the M3 half-track rather than anything else. The half-track survived, but it was forced to fall back. In the centre there had been no encounters at all in the town, so I repositioned my M8 and M3 to cover the buildings by the forest on the left, and they spotted an MG42 moving towards the buildings and managed to force it to fall back. I'd brought in another armoured rifle squad on the left and sent it up to get vision of the left flank. It still seemed clear, so I pushed the squad along the tree line to make sure that the trees were clear. So overall at this point, the picture looked worse than it actually was. There was a gaping hole on the right, but my recce section there hadn't seen any signs of a mass push forward, so I was confident I could plug that gap with reinforcements. The Germans seemed content to sit and hold the town, and it had always been part of my plan to let him do that anyway. And it looked like the left flank wasn't too heavily defended and would be open to an eventual attack, so I was still fairly confident. On the left hand side I had now brought in an M16 anti-aircraft unit to support, and I'd repositioned my vehicles to provide machine gun cover if the Fusiliers in the forest decided to show face. I could see a Panzerjäger 35, but it was holding position well back. And then, as if I'd requested it, the Fusiliers emerged from the forest and were engaged by multiple vehicles. They went to ground, and I later on spotted them falling back away from the forest. In the town, a truck carrying an Osttroppen squad was spotted by the M8 and M3, and they took it out, although the infantry survived and made it into a building. And over on the right, I was now reinforcing that flank with an M1 57mm anti-tank gun and an armoured rifle squad. I was uncertain how far the Germans had advanced, so I had my units edge forward cautiously there. And by now over on the left, the Panzerjäger 35 had advanced slightly, and it was firing on my M5 and was able to immobilise it. So I called in the P-38 again and sent it to hit the tank destroyer. And this time the attack was a bit more effective, forcing the Panzerjäger to retreat. And now things were looking a bit better again. We're almost back to 50-50 map control, and I'm beginning to reclaim some of the territory on the right, where it looks at least the armoured units are still holding back by the buildings. We're now into phase B though, so I need to start getting tanks in on the left to seriously test the defences in that flank. In the centre, nothing much is happening again. With the Fusiliers on the left having driven back, I pushed the rifle squad forward to get them into the trees where the Fusiliers had been, but they were fired on in the open ground by the Austroppen squad. The rifles managed to get to the trees, but they were pinned down. So I had my M21 firing the Austroppen, but the Panzerjäger 35 returned and fired again on my M5. The Austroppen had managed to evade the mortar fire and pushed forward towards my pinned rifle squad, so I moved an M3 up to support them. But the half-track was fired on by a Pak 38 in the tree line to the rear left, and it was forced to retreat. And with the M3 falling back, the Austroppen were able to continue to advance and force my rifles to surrender. So the Germans are beginning to build up a force on the left, and I feel that I can't allow that to continue, so I decide to try and take out the Panzer 35 that's sitting to the left of the town. I send my rifle squad into a building in front of it, but it turns out to be occupied by an Austroppen squad. Luckily that squad quickly surrenders, and my rifle squad then make it into the building and they're able to destroy the tank before it can move out of range. Over on the right, I'm still advancing to make sure that the Germans can't remove his units from that flank, and my rifle squad encounters a Fusilier squad in the tree line. I send my M3 to provide support, keeping it in cover in the orchard. I also move my M1 up towards the stand of trees so that it has line of sight in the buildings, as I think the German armour's still in there. But it turns out that it is, and the Panzer 35 kills my M3. The orchard didn't provide the cover I thought it would. On the left I have my first proper tank arriving, an M4A1 Sherman, but the Panzerjäger 35 has been joined by a second tank destroyer. And there's also a field gun there. The tank destroyers fire on my M21, and the field gun and Infanterie shoots at 18 targets of the M3. I tried to get the mortar to lay smoke to conceal itself, but it was destroyed just as it fired the smoke round. I decided to chance moving the Sherman up on the left to get line of sight on the tank destroyers, hoping they were both Panzerjäger 35s. But when the Sherman doesn't get a hit with its first couple of shots, I decide not to risk it further and pull it back into cover. On the right, my rifle squad is being whittled down, and my M1 anti-tank gun is fired on as it moves up, and it gets pinned in the open and destroyed before it can get a shot off. I've got an M4A3 Sherman coming in to reinforce that flank, and I should have waited until it was there before I began that advance. On the left, I'm adding to my force with another armoured rifle squad and an M4A3 Sherman, so I move the M4A1 to the other end of the tree line so that it will have a different angle when I push forward. But I end up sending it too far, and it's in line of sight of the tank destroyers. They exchange shots, but my Sherman survives a couple of hits, although it is forced to fall back. Over on the right, the Panzer 35 has moved forward to fire on my rifle squad, but my 76mm Sherman's getting near to line of sight on the German tank. But then a Ju-87G comes in, heading for the Sherman, and all I have to counter it is my Lightning. Fortunately, the Lightning's able to get into range to engage the Stuka just as it opens up, and it's able to force it to fall back. But the German had brought in a Focke-Wulf FW-190, and that was able to shoot down my Lightning. On the ground though, the Sherman advanced, and it was able to kill the Panzer 35 finally. Over on the left, the M3 that had just brought in my rifle squad ended up on the wrong side of the tree line, and it was killed by the Panzerjäger 35. My M4A3 was now in the scene, and I had it moved to engage the German armour, but it looks like there's now a tank there as well as the tank destroyers, so again I pull my Sherman into cover until I can improve the odds. So in the big picture, over on the right I've lost my rifle squad, so I pull the unsupported Sherman into cover in the orchard, hoping that being inside an orchard gives more cover than being behind it. Things remain completely unchanged in the town, where there's been no movement spotted at all, and it's pretty clear from what's happened on the right that the German's unlikely to advance from his positions, even if he has the chance. So I feel able to concentrate on building up my force to attack on the left. I need to have enough anti-tank capacity there to knock out the German armour quickly. I move my rifle squad into the tree line on the left, and it confirms there's still the tank and two tank destroyers in the field beyond. As they manoeuvre closer, the tank turns out to be a STUG 3. So I reckon the German has at least the STUG, 2 Panzerjägers, a Pak 38 and an IG-18 covering the left flank with some infantry support. I'd prefer to wait until I had some artillery to support an attack, but I think I'm going to have to chance it with just my lightning to provide backup. So I've brought a 76mm M5 anti-tank gun in to help me deal with the STUG, and I have another M4A3 and an armoured rifle squad on the way in. I move the M5 forward into the trees and send the M4A1 back towards the gap in the tree line to the right. The M5 gets into the tree line and it targets what's turned out to be a Marder, while the Sherman goes for the STUG. The M5 is able to immobilise the Marder and break its morale. I've also now moved the M4A3 Sherman forward on the left of the trees, and it engages the STUG while the M4A1 switches to target the Panzerjäger 35. The Marder ends up being taken out by heavy machine gun fire from the M4A3. It's only got armour of 2. I think the HE value in the machine gun was 6 or 8. And the M4A1 takes out the Panzerjäger 35 at the same time. Then a shot from the M4A3's main gun on the, well, towards the STUG forces the STUG to fall back. So it's all pretty hectic over on this flank just now. The German had brought in a Junkers 87G and had it target my M16 anti-aircraft unit, but I had so many MGs in the area that it was forced to fall back after just a few shots. And the retreating STUG was then destroyed by my M4A3. So the attack on the left's gone brilliantly. I've taken out all the armour without any losses. There are clearly still German units in the area, but I reckoned I had enough firepower to deal with anything I might encounter, so I began pushing forward. Within seconds, the Pak 38 and the Infanterie Geschütze 18 opened up on the Shermans. The Pak 38 was eliminated quickly by the tanks, and they then fired on the IG-18. I had the P-38 on standby though, and that was able to deal with the anti-tank guns. Well, I was at least able to suppress it. And on the ground, my infantry and half-track spotted the Osttruppen squad, and everything I had opened up on it. And it was wiped out, unsurprisingly. We found an Aufklärer section on the far left of the map and destroyed that as well. And with the number of vehicles and guns the German had lost in the last minute or so, I was really confident that he couldn't have any real strength left there, and launched an all-out push. My units resumed their advance until the IG-18 and the Osttruppen recovered morale and started firing again. The field gun was destroyed immediately, and the infantry was finally dealt with shortly after. I was surprised though that the front line marker still didn't fall back after we'd destroyed those units, and as we advanced, we eventually spotted a Führer squad. That was also destroyed, and we finally had control of that flank and could now push in towards the centre. Another STUG appeared on a suicide charge, and all 3 Shermans fired on it. I don't know which one got the final kill. And then I kept my units advancing towards the centre to cut off the reinforcement route. I presumed the German would bring in reinforcements on the left, but I planned to keep my tanks screened by the tree lines, and also sent an M3 and my M16 to help guard against any counterattack out of to the left from the town. I'd brought an armoured rifle squad in on the right and had it advance along with the M8 Scott and the Sherman to engage the German infantry. The Germans were pinned quite quickly, and then I pushed the rifles forward to try and force their surrender. Back over on the left, the German had brought in another Marder and sent it to engage my armour, and also brought in a Junkers 87G to support it. The Stuka went for my M4A1 but didn't damage it, and it was driven off by machine gun fire. but the Marder targeted and destroyed one of my M4A3s. My tanks seemed not to have visual on the Marder, although it continued firing on them, and this turned out to be a significant mistake on my part, not killing the Marder. I had brought in a Thunderbolt to attack the artillery behind the town, and that was able to suppress that. And I also had my lightning on hand, and I sent it to strike the Marder, and I was able to force it to retreat, which left my tanks able to focus on cutting off the main road. So the first part of my plan has been achieved. I've advanced up the left and I'm now moving in towards the centre to cut off reinforcements. And the next part was to prepare for an attack on the town, so I had my tanks focus on taking out the artillery and anti-aircraft units in the centre, while I brought up more infantry along the main road towards the town. I'd also brought in a Sherman OP observer and to call in a barrage in the town, but as I moved it into range it uncovered a Pioneer squad, so I pulled it back. The machine gun fire from the tank, an M3 and the M16 wiped out the Pioneers, and I could then send the Sherman back in to direct fire on the town. So now we're well advanced on the left. Over on the right hand flank, I'd moved my position. In the left hand flank I'd moved my tanks into position where they were screened from the rear of the map by the trees, sent the rifle squad into trees to watch for anything that was approaching, and the tanks fired on a flak Veerling that they'd already driven back from the rear of the town. I'd been focusing so intently on the left flank that I hadn't realised that my rifle squad on the right hadn't moved close enough to force the German infantry to surrender, so things on that flank remain unchanged, and now I was just waiting for my artillery. So the off-map barrage comes in the town, hopefully causing some casualties, more likely to cause suppression though, but a 155mm barrage never looks very impressive. I plan to call in at least one more barrage in the town before trying to take it. On the right, Mirillis Action spotted the Panzerjäger 35 and the Marder that had been up by the buildings, now heading towards the centre to counter my push from the left. I'd called another Sherman 76 in to bolster my force on the right, but decided to push forward instead of waiting since the two tank destroyers had been pulled out of the line. My M3 and the rifle squad advanced, and they uncovered the Fusilier squad in the trees again. And the second tank's now arriving. With the off-map barrage over, I sent some of my units in the town a bit further forward to see if I could force any quick surrenders of pinned units. An infantry squad opened up from a building on the outskirts to the right of town, but it then took fire from a Scot which was over on the right flank and it went to ground. Mirillis then spotted an Osttroppen squad in the centre of the town, but I decided just to keep an eye on it for now while I waited for more troops to strengthen my position. The German was now assembling units to counter my advance on the left. He had the tank destroyers moving in from the right flank, as well as a Jagd Panther and a Panzer III coming in as reinforcements in the centre. The Jagd Panther targeted my M4A3, forcing it to retreat. And at the same time, my M4A1 took out the Marder that had been moved over from the right flank. But the Jagd Panther continued firing on my A3 until the A1 switched to target the Jagd Panther, and then they began trading shots. It's not much of a competition there, it's pretty one-sided. The Junkers 87G then came back in, just as I brought my P38, intended the Lightning to attack the Jagd Panther, but diverted it to help deal with the Stuka first. And its eventual attack on the Jagd Panther was pretty ineffective. And unfortunately, the Jagd Panther had been able to kill my M4A1 while that attack was coming in. I had been bringing in another M5 anti-tank gun to support the tanks, but its transport had been hit as it moved up, and it was now under fire from a Pak 43 while the Marder was targeting a retreating M3 half-track. So things were beginning to fall apart on the left. On the right, my rifle squad had advanced and detected a SIG-33 and engaged it at close range. The field gun was suppressed quickly and went to ground. A Fusilier squad then arrived to support the SIG, and it was also pinned quickly by fire from the M3 and the M8. My position on the left was really beginning to deteriorate now, as the Marder finished off my retreating Sherman, so that was all the tanks gone. And I decided that I was just going to leave the units on the left where they were to buy me time as the German worked his way through them one by one. I had a leader squad in amongst them, and that would help prevent morale breaking too quickly. My M5 had recovered morale, and I hoped to at least get it into better cover where it might do some damage, and also planned to bring in more tanks to take up defensive positions and stop the Germans reclaiming too much ground. And with the balance of power now swinging away from me on the left, I decided to start making some gains in the town. I started by targeting the Osttroopens that I'd been keeping an eye on, and I also moved some of my rifle squads forward and encountered a second German squad in an MG42. I tasked an M3 to give covering fire from the left, but my rifle squad is pinned and being shot to pieces. On the left, the Marder advanced towards my M5 and took it out before the gun got a shot off. And as I said, not attacking that Marder earlier allowed it to go and kill one of my stronger tanks, as well as the anti-tank gun that was meant to reinforce them. And the German units slowly closed in on my positions, with the Marder engaging my M16 and an SPW-204 advancing on my rifles. I'd called in another off-map barrage in the town by now, and it seemed to be quite effective this time. But my units immediately resumed their advance orders, and they almost get caught up in the barrage. Over on the right, the firefight between the rifles and the German Fusiliers continued. When the Fusiliers were suppressed, I repositioned my vehicles to clear the buildings. A SIG-33 engaged my Scot, but it was taken out. An MG42 then opened up from about one of the buildings as the Fusiliers reappeared and they were eliminated. And with that, I was able to then overrun the remaining German positions and destroyed the MG42. In the town, one of my M3s advanced right behind the barrage and forced a Fusilier squad to surrender. The German units that were holding around the church also seemed to be either suppressed or taken out. And with the area being cleared, my units pushed forward while we dealt with an Osttroopen squad on the right side of the road, the main road. On the left, my M16 won the shootout with the Marder, forcing it to fall back, which gave me a slight relief. But the slow German advance continued, with the Jagdpanther wiping out my rifle squad. And the M16 unwisely followed after the Marder into line of sight of the Pak 43 and was killed. Over on the right, an Abelwerfer 42 strike forced a couple of my tanks to fall back, and it killed the half-track that was over there as well. So the Germans fighting back a bit desperately now. And in the centre, the Osttroopen squad eventually surrendered and my units advanced again. And they eventually spotted 3 more infantry squads and another MG42. My units are a bit too strung out to give effective mutual support, and my more advanced units are too weak to hold the ground that they've taken. So, not looking great in the town, and especially with the Jagdpanther and the Panzer closing in. The Jagdpanther took out one of my M3s on the outskirts of the town. So things are beginning to look a bit dicey now, but I'm not too worried about the right flank. I'm sure that will be fine when my armour recovers its morale. And we've got a lot of ground on the left that we need to lose before the German starts getting victory points. The Jagdpanther and Panzer III were joined by the SPW-204 firing on my leader's unit, so I called in my last 155mm barrage in that position to try and suppress them. I think it worked. On the left I had 2 more M4A3 76mm Shermans moving in, and they spotted the Marder and fired on it. It survived a few hits, but it was eventually destroyed. But things over in this flank had really deteriorated since I'd given these tanks their orders, and I really should have gone back and given them orders to take up a defensive position further back and just wait to block the German advance. Over on the right, a Fusilier squad approached through the orchard where my Sherman and rifles were able to pin it. That was quickly dealt with. And the other Sherman and the Scot discovered another Fusilier squad still in the village, and they engaged it. A KF-70 transport emerged onto the road and was killed by my Sherman. And a Stug 3 then appeared in the same place, and it was also killed by the Sherman. And it looked like the Scot had finished off the Fusiliers that were in the village. So they began moving forward to link up with the other Sherman and the infantry. And the Sherman here engaged and took out a Panzerjäger 35 that was moving over by the town. I still held quite a good chunk of the town, and I decided to move the remains of a rifle squad across the road to cover the right, but as it moved it was caught in the open by a Fusilier squad and pinned. I had my self-propelled artillery targeting the Fusiliers on the far right, and I moved an M3 to try and save the pinned rifles, but it was too late. As I said earlier, I needed to give my Shermans on the left orders to defend, but I was occupied elsewhere, so they resumed their advance, moving into line of sight of the Pak 43. And the German anti-tank gun made short work of my tanks. 2 shots, 2 kills. I had ordered the Sherman and the Scot on the right to move forward and link up with the other tank, and on the way they discovered the Fusiliers were still in the building, and they were able to suppress them again. The tanks then bypassed the infantry into the open ground beyond the buildings. Unfortunately they stopped there. There's a STOS troop over on the right hand side in the orchard, but the Fusiliers recovered morale and they're able to destroy my Scot. But the 2 Shermans then made sure that they finally finished off those Fusiliers. I'd brought an M4A3 in to help me hold the town and potentially send it out to the left if armour appeared there. I ordered Mirillis Action to move into the church tower to get me better vision, but a Fusilier squad got there first and took them out, followed quickly by an M3. I lost a second M3 over to the right of the town and decided things were too risky, so I ordered my remaining rifles and the Sherman to pull back down the main road and wait for reinforcements. But they stopped and took out the Fusiliers in the church first. Well, they may have just sent them to ground. On the left side, my OP Sherman was well screened from the anti-tank units for now, and it spotted a Fusilier squad moving forward in the open. It fired on them and it was able to pin them down. But more infantry then emerged from the trees, and the tank was able to deal reasonably effectively with this squad. Took out a number of them and pinned them down, but unfortunately there was a second squad following up and they killed the tank. On the right, another Stug 3 appeared and it was engaged by my Sherman in the orchard. And the Stug was killed quite quickly. I was wary of there being infantry moving up behind the trees, so I moved the rifle squad up to protect the tank. And as the infantry moved forward, a pioneer squad appeared in the tree line. The infantry in the tank were able to quickly pin them down and force them to surrender. And this gave me a bit of breathing space, although there was still that STOS troop section in the orchard on the right edge. I'd brought in a couple of armoured rifle squads to hold the left flank and had them advance towards the Fusiliers, supported by fire from the M7 self-propelled artillery. My rifle squads took out the Fusiliers, but the Panzer III and the Jagdpanther were moving in their direction again. So overall, I'm stretched pretty thin, I still hold more of the map and have a good lead and not long to go. So I moved the rifle squad on the right to a position with good view of the rear area and repositioned the Shermans to cover the approaches both from the rear and the centre. I had more infantry coming in to help me regain a foothold in the centre of the town, and had another tank moving up to support the infantry on the left. I figured that the large bulge on the right was more down to me having no units there than the Germans having advanced, so I planned to bring in a couple of units just to sweep that area and give me back control of it. My latest tank on the left was another M4A3 76mm Sherman. I didn't want to risk it against the Jagdpanther, so I held it back slightly while I brought in my air power. The P38 and P47 Thunderbolt. The Jagdpanther was almost suppressed by the strike, and the Panzer III was suppressed and fell back. And when the airstrike came in, I sent my Sherman forward under cover of the strike, and it quickly took out the Panzer III. And it turned out that the Jagdpanther was also dropping back, and the Sherman hit it with sustained fire, and it was able to score a couple of bounces on the tank destroyer, and that made sure that it fell well back from the front. So I was pleased with the results of that small action there, giving me control of the left for a while longer. In the town, the fresh armoured rifle squads that I'd brought in to bolster my forces there took up positions near the crossroads, and I also moved my M7s a bit further forward to avoid counter-battery fire. Ju-87G came in to target one of the M7s, but it was driven off by machine gun fire before it was able to make a proper attack. I'd also brought in my P38, which was able to shoot down the Stuka. On the left, the Jagdpanther had recovered morale and began advancing forward again, although it was reversing forward. And by now I had another 76mm M5 anti-tank gun along with the Sherman. The tank destroyed the Jagdpanther's engine and the M5 knocked it out. So they then turned their attention on the Pak 43 in the tree line, and they traded shots for a while, but I decided to pull the Sherman into cover and leave the M5 to suppress the Pak. So I've managed to re-establish control of the left flank, and I'm clearing out the right flank with my M5s, getting me back to a +1 position. My M7s fired on the Pak 43's position and they were able to destroy it, and with that I decided to focus on getting more control of the town and linking up again with the Shermans on the right. My M5s over here had confirmed that the area wasn't occupied by Germans, so I had them probed towards the right flank while waiting on my incoming infantry support. Towards the rear, a weak Osttroppen squad appeared, and it was pinned down by my Sherman. This is the squad that they'd hit earlier. A Fusilier squad then emerged and was eliminated quickly by the Sherman, and once it had done that, it went on and finished off the Osttroppen. After taking out the Pak 43, I'd ordered my M7s to change position again to avoid counter-battery fire, which was just as well, as a Nebelwerfer barrage came in seconds later. But one of my Sherman M4A3s over on the right had spotted the Nebelwerfer when it fired, and it opened up on the artillery unit. And now, as I felt that the left flank was fairly secure, I thought it would be better to send my units to make a flank attack on the town rather than sending them forward and potentially running into another Jagdpanther that might be being brought in. And I also had a couple more armoured rifle squads and a command M5A1 that I'd brought in to push from that flank. It was clear there was still something in the forest to the left of the town, so I had my M7s bombard that area. Over on the right, a Stug appeared and was killed by my Sherman, which had a nice position below a tree, and a second Stug appeared in the same place, and that was also taken out by the Sherman. Over on the left, my M7s drove the remains of a few Fusilier squads out of the forest, straight into a hail of machine gun fire. And then, in a last act of defiance, a Fusilier squad appeared in the church, and the remains of another in a building in front of it, and they ended up losing an M3. But I had my P47 on hand, and the Thunderbolt attacked the squad that was in the church. And I sent my Lightning that had loitering to hit a Kubelwagen that was bringing in an Aufklärer squad. So the neutral view shows that the Germans still had a fair few units, particularly in the town, but didn't really have any ranged anti-tank capability. I had good control of both flanks and would have been able to take the town eventually, so I reckon that I had managed to weather his counter-attack and would have been able to go on and dominate the map if there had been more time. But as it was, time ran out and I won a minor victory. I think this was one of the most enjoyable battles that I've fought in Steel Division, and props to Kowarski for a good fight. If he'd had just one or two more armoured vehicles to throw into that pushback on the left flank, things might have gone differently. But in the end, he just didn't have enough to carry through with that counterattack, and I was able to survive it. So, I hope you've enjoyed this battle. I do think it was a really good battle, and thanks for watching. Please rate the video and leave me a comment if you've got any feedback, any thoughts or any suggestions. And if you're enjoying the series, please subscribe to the channel. And I hope to see you again in the next part. Cheers.